Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, bright sunny Friday here in Boston, and Friday is the time when BookTube indulges in one of my favorite BookTube rituals. Well, no matter what you call it, plenty of people call it Friday Reads, but there's also stuff I'm reading lately, or stuff I've just read, or bits and pieces of all kinds of things. It's no matter what it is, it falls under the broader headline of #am_reading, and it's really a check-in. Just a regular check-in, because aside from myself, you all have busy lives and jobs and friends and family and pants and hygiene and whatnot. And so a weekly check-in feels great, where I get to learn what's going on in your life, a little bit of what you're reading, a little bit of what you have read or what you're looking forward to reading. I love them, and I don't do Friday Reads regularly enough. I really don't. I should. Considering how much I enjoy seeing it in my feed, I saw a bunch of these kinds of videos, no matter what we're calling them. I saw a bunch of them today. Jason Harrigan, I'll leave links to the ones that I can remember. Jason Harrigan did one where he turned the mic over to his daughter Eve, and it was wonderful, absolutely charming. Shannon Ridler did one that talked about stuff that she's been reading, but also stuff that she's been watching in the Winter Olympics. Made me wonder how many of you are watching the Winter Olympics. Who else did I see? Louise the BigHaired Bookworm did a really good, rambly, wonderful 30-minute Friday Reads or weekly check-in or whatever, which was about books, but also about some of her favorite true crime podcasts. Fascinating to listen to, even if I don't listen to podcasts. And David Murphy did What Have I Been Reading and Doing and Thinking Lately? That was, well, you know how every once in a while your cats will get the zoomies and they just zip all around and they're absolutely manic with energy so that they're tripping over themselves? Well, imagine that only done by a weird old bookworm instead. So it was the same thing. It was a Zoomies Friday Reads. And I want to do one too. I want to do a video today. I don't really need to do the catching up aspect of Friday Reads, because I unlike the other people who do Friday Reads, I do 15 videos a day, and so you know how I'm doing. So we don't need to cover that. And I also don't need to cover books that I've received recently, because we cover that as well on this channel. But I want to show you a bunch of things that I'm planning on reading either this weekend. I can get a lot of them done this weekend, or in the upcoming week. This weekend is artificially prolonged here in the United States because Monday is President's Day. And David Murphy points out in his video that was always a weird crap holiday anyway, because presidents in the United States have relocated Indian nations. They have bombed whole nations in secret without telling the American people. They've done a whole bunch of things, including incinerate 2 Japanese cities. So having a President's Day has always been a bit weird. They can be figures of interest. Definitely, they should be figures of interest for any American. But figures of holiday-style adulation, I mean, that was bad enough before a sitting U.S. president organized and orchestrated an armed insurrection to overthrow the government and install himself as an unelected dictator for life. You'd think that would be such a nuclear red line in the whole idea of idolizing presidents, and yet half of this country, slightly more than half the adult population in this country, is Nazi or Nazi sympathetic, and they're okay with living in a dictatorship in which they have no right other than to lick the heel of the dictator, provided the dictator really annoys that one uppity, college-educated cousin or in-law of theirs. So long as the dictator owns the libs, they're willing to sign away their freedom to do it. So President's Day seems even more ironic than usual, and it's a bitter thing for me anyway, because I don't think mail is delivered on President's Day. But I'll have longer to read, so I imagine I'll get a lot of these things done this coming weekend. I wanted to show them to you, and we'll start with a good old-fashioned premise. This is by Jacqueline Druga, and it is called Into the Ash. It's a post-apocalyptic thriller. I believe it's self-published, and its inciting incident, to use writing workshop terminology, is not an EMP, from the Soviet Union, or a massive biochemical warfare thing that requires you to invent the whole inciting incident. Instead, the inciting incident, the thing that causes world catastrophe here, is going to happen, and we know what's going to happen when it does. The thing that starts off kicks off the post-apocalyptic part of this plot is that the Yellowstone supercaldera erupts. And those of you who don't know what that is, you might be thinking from the name of it, vaguely thinking, oh, okay, so is there like a dormant volcano in Yellowstone National Park, and that doesn't do it justice. It's a system of volcanoes that add up to one gigantic super volcano. Geologists will never tell you that anything is due for an eruption, but it is very much due for an eruption. It's been hundreds of thousands of years. It's still active. You only have to go to Yosemite and see Old Faithful to know that it's still very much active. And there are minor indications that it is getting more active, that it is in fact building to an eruption. If the Yellowstone supercaldera were to erupt, pretty much all civilization on Earth would eventually end. If not right away in the blast radius of the eruption, then pretty quickly, because if the Yellowstone supercaldera erupted, not only would it blanket the world's bread basket, the American Midwest and Upper Midwest, in 10 feet of ash. So no more crops, no more bread, no more wheat, no more anything like that, no more livestock. Not only would it do that, but it would also hurl trillions of tons of dust and debris into the atmosphere. And that would just stay there. So not only would that dust and debris block sunlight, meaning no agriculture anywhere else, but also it would have an albedo effect. It would be reflecting sunlight, which means it would plunge the world's temperatures. We've seen little versions of this. The Toba volcano, when it erupted, caused a little version of this that nevertheless caused misery all over the world in the year without a summer. And we have geological idea from the records. We have an idea of what would happen, of what the last eruption of the Yellowstone supercaldera was like. And it's cataclysmic beyond anything that we could really imagine. It doesn't really do justice to say it's a volcano erupting. And that's what happens at the beginning of this book. And as far as I remember, the two main characters don't really know each other, but they happen to be just at the edge of the death radius. Because if this thing did erupt, there'd be a massive death radius inside of which everything would just die. They wouldn't have to worry about a post-apocalyptic future because they'd be dead. And I think the two main characters here are just outside of that radius, and in order to stay outside of that radius, they have to get moving and keep moving. In a world, so you see what I mean? This is a post-apocalyptic thriller, but it's a real apocalypse. So there won't be any roving bands of cannibals or anything like that. Instead, I'm looking forward to it being really fascinating. It'll depend, of course, on, who's the author again? Jacqueline Druga. I do not think I know this author. It'll depend entirely on what kind of job she does, right? If she does a great job, if she knocks it out of the park, then that's what'll work. Okay, this next one is by Ryan Walters. It's a work of biography. It's got its work cut out for it. This is the Jazz Age president defending Warren G. Harding. This book actually tries to say that Warren Gamaliel Harding was not one of the worst presidents in American history. Harding is typically listed from think tanks and various U.S. historians as one of the worst presidents in U.S. history, right up there with Nixon. Now, again, I don't want to turn this Friday Reads into a political rant, but all of those lists have been junked. They're all in the waste heap. It's ridiculous even to talk about them all. It's ridiculous to talk about defending Warren Harding. Warren Harding was inept and stupid and corrupt, and it never crossed his mind, not even in a wild fantasy, to organize and implement a violent insurrection to attack the capital of my country, execute his vice president and anyone else who disagrees with him, and install himself as a dictator for life and unelected. Overturn a legitimate election and install himself in power, I guess, forever. People who tell me, well, that's ridiculous. Why are you saying that Trump tried to install himself as an unelected dictator for life? I want to ask you one question. Can you imagine an election in which Donald Trump would say I did legitimately lose? Now, he already laid the groundwork. He was already saying during the election campaign that even if he won, he was still owed a third term because of whatever. I have no idea. Guaranteed, when he resumes power, there will be no talk about future elections. There will be no talk about handing off the baton to anybody else. And hence, there's no talk anymore about bad U.S. presidents. I lived through and wrote op-ed. I earned a good living attacking Richard Nixon in his administration as the worst thing that had ever happened to this country. It never crossed Richard Nixon's mind, never crossed his mind to overthrow the United States government and install himself in power illegally. No one's ever come close to that. But still, even saying that's just kind of a throat clearing just so we know what page we're on. There is no comparison. There is no list anymore about the worst U.S. president. There's just one figure on that list. No one else comes anywhere close. Even given that throat clearing, this is still an uphill battle. There's virtually no way to defend Warren Harding. But I'm willing to see this guy try. Absolutely willing to see him try. Then we have something that this is, it's a known quantity in part to me. This is Katherine the Damned. It has a cover blurb from Michael Moorcock, no less. This is the first book in a fantasy series by Jonathan Mayberry. And the reason this is of course the first book, so I haven't read the series. But the reason why this isn't a totally terra incognita is because I've read Jonathan Mayberry a lot. I've read a lot of what this guy has written, and he's terrific. Absolutely terrific. He can do no wrong. His credit in the Bank of Steve is immensely high. So, if he wants to branch out, he's never written epic fantasy before that I know of. I think this is the first of that. If he's willing to branch out to that, I am certainly willing to follow him. Absolutely willing to follow him. Okay, this next one is by Gareth Steele. It's called Never Work with Animals. It's a veterinarian's memoir. I have read many, many veterinarians' memoirs. I think they're really kind of heroic. And the stories that they tell, even the tragic ones, are usually so heartfelt. And this title, of course, plays on the old Hollywood saw of never work with animals or children. But how can you resist a cover like that? I mean, how can you do that? So I will read this guy's stories. I'm sure that some of them will be very sad. I've had many, many, many times dealing with veterinarians. I try to deal with them as little as possible. As little as possible. It's my belief. I think it's probably a little bit on the outlier side. It's my belief that a well cared for dog scarcely ever needs to visit the vet. Scarcely ever. A well cared for dog, a well watched and cared for dog, is not going to be contracting the diseases that veterinarians just blandly, routinely say you have to come in and have us overcharge you to inoculate your dog against. They're not going to do it. They're not going to contract those diseases if you're taking care of them. If you're letting them out in the back 40 to roam around in the woods for all day long, and then at supper time you think, oh yeah, I have a dog. If you're going to do that, fine. But if they're your dogs are house pets, right? Most 99% of dogs are house pets. If you have a dog like that, I'll do it when I have to, of course. My poor Malin Moore, the pointer that I had, one of the dogs that I had before Frida, had massive skin allergies. She was basically allergic to everything in the world. And they were really, really bad. It wasn't anything that I could tell her to just tough it out. She needed prednisone every day of her life to calm her skin. I tried everything. We tried every kind of shampoo or lotion or anything, but she needed prednisone. So I was on the hook to the vet. They knew where I was. They knew I needed that prescription refilled, and in order to get that prescription refilled, they could make me do anything they want. I wasn't going to negotiate with that. If they said, yeah, we'll refill this prescription, but you need to bring both dogs in for, our annual battery of tests. And I would say to them, there is absolutely no reason for you to test these dogs for rabies. I know as well as you, I probably know better than you, how they can contract rabies. They did not do it. They do not. There is no reason for me to pay $75 for them to be tested for rabies. To say nothing of all the rest of it. I know what they're coming in contact with. But I had to do it. Week after week, month after month, year after year, I had to do it. But Frida has almost never been to the vet. Why would she need to be? The thing that she'll need the vet for is her teeth. And she'll need that in 10 years. She doesn't need it now. Why would she need a vet? We're together all the time. I know exactly what she's exposed to and what she isn't. But anyway, this is still going to be adorable to read, I'm sure. Even the heartbreaky stuff will be adorable to read. Unlike this next one. This next one will not be adorable to read. It may be the last chance that I give this author, really. The author is James Lindsay. Some of you will know him as the co-author of Cynical Theories, which was really, really fascinating. He did it with Helen Pluckrose, where they wanted to assess the extent of social justice warrior, Twitter, blue checkmark, diversity, equity, and inclusion rot, how far that had gone in academia and in academic studies. So they made up a whole bunch of bogus papers. Ridiculous stuff. It was stuff that if you weren't Twitter indoctrinated in this ridiculous nonsense about how there are 750 genders, you wouldn't even get past the title. You would know right away this was a prank. But they thought, it's worth testing. We'll submit these papers and see how many of them get peer approved for critical journals, and all of them did. As ridiculous as they were, all of them did. It was a great pants-pulling gesture on the insanity of modern academia that has only gotten worse. That insanity has only gotten worse. And so I love that. I love listening to Helen Pluckrose talk. And at first, I loved listening to James Lindsay talk. But then he started showing up in all the wrong places and maybe droning on a little too long. about systematic evils. Keep in mind, I might rail against those blue-haired, danger haircut, blue checkmark Twitter scolds and censors, but I also rail against the correspondingly zealous and insane wing of the far right as well. I don't like either one of them. Both of them want only ill for me and you. So I don't like either one of them. So when I see somebody drifting in that direction, I start to wonder. Like, for instance, when I started to see him drift in that direction, one of my first questions was, am I ever going to see a collaboration between him and Alan Puckrose again? Because she's not going to drift in that direction. And if he does, she won't work with him again. I don't know. James Lindsay is the author, and this is his new book, Race Marxism, in which he takes on not the academic version of critical race theory, but the actual implemented version of critical race theory. There are two. The people on Twitter who, when you bring up critical race theory, say you just don't understand what it is. It's an obscure academic legal discipline that's been taught in schools, the academic at the graduate legal level for 70 years. It's no big deal. Those people are lying. They know perfectly well that there's also another version of there's a popularly implemented version of critical race theory. And they know perfectly well that that's true. And they know that plenty of schools are trying to implement that kind of critical race theory. They're not teaching the thing that's taught in graduate levels of, legal history. And they know that. They know that we're not talking about that when you bring it up. They're talking about your grade school children being told by their teachers to turn to the nearest person, the next kid in the aisle, and say out loud, "I am a racist, and so is mommy and daddy." And there are many, many documented cases of students, of grade school children, being asked to do that, or worse, told to do that. Many, many examples of high school students being asked to turn to the nearest person in the class who's not white and apologize. They've never done a racist thing in their lives. That kind of thing, that kind of social reprogramming thing, that Twitter thing, is also under the heading of critical race theory. It's just two things with the same term. And the classic dodge that I absolutely hate is when somebody wants to excuse the former by saying it's the latter. Oh, you mean that obscure legal doctrine that no one ever actually teaches in high school? Now, I don't mean that, and you know that I don't mean that. And that's the target of this book by James Lindsay. That the old ideology of Marxism, which had one kernel that it revolved the whole world around, which was, class. That here, it's Marxism. The mechanics are all the same, but the kernel has been changed from class to race. But it's every bit as fraudulent and bankrupt a whole ideology. I don't know that I agree with that parallelism, and I don't know that I'm going to agree with James Lindsay, even if I did agree with the parallelism, because I think it's like I've said. If you are willing to appear on Joe Rogan's podcast, I think I probably know a lot about you. without asking you any questions, I think I probably know a lot about you. James Lindsay is the type who does due diligence on whatever venue he appears. So he would not have appeared on things like that without knowing who else has appeared on things like that. We shall see. I will give the book a try. I think he's gotten more hysterical as time has gone on. You can hate the kind of Twitter-fueled everyone but me is a racist kind of ideology that has sprung up in the last 6 years. You can hate that. I certainly do. But if you go from that to there's no such thing as racism, for instance, or there's no such thing as sexism, or the injustices that some of these people before they were radicalized by Twitter were railing against just don't exist, then you lose me. Of course they exist. We'll see. We'll give it a try. But I don't know, unless this one pleases me, I don't think I'll read any more James Lindsay books. Then the next one is by Neil Thompson. Not sure I know this writer. This is a work of history, and it is The First Kennedys, The Humble Roots of an American Dynasty. And there on the cover, you see, you don't know that you'll recognize all three of those people, but that is Joe Kennedy, Ambassador Kennedy, the father of the Kennedy clan, and that is Honey Fitzgerald, which is the other side. When you think of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, he's taking the Fitzgerald part from the other side of the other branch of the family. And there they are at the beach with someone else. And this is the 80 millionth Kennedy book that I've read, but it could be good. I'm perfectly willing to give it a try. Then we have The Naked Don't Fear the Water. This is by Matthew Akins. And its premise is fascinating. He's a journalist. He's a fairly young journalist. And a friend of his was an Afghan refugee. and had to go on the long trek to safety. And he decided to report on it, but then he decided that the truest way to report on it would be to live it. So he left behind his passport. He left behind his identification papers. He journeyed with his friend on a route that could easily end in death, and that certainly could end in imprisonment at 12 points along the way. Can't wait to read this and see. It feels a lot like Nellie Bly style frontline journalism, where you're not just taking dictation from a source in a comfortable hotel in Kabul, where instead you're living the story in order to see what it's like. If that's true, I'm right on board. Okay. Well, we need a little silliness in terms of, in addition to all this seriousness. This next one is by L.J. Shen. There is some silliness on this. This isn't the only one. This is by L.J. Shen, and it is The Rake. And it's a very sexy story. It's set in Boston, and it's the story might be hypersexualized, but it is very traditional romance novel fodder. You've got the female main character does not want to marry. She wants her freedom. And you've got the male main character who is rumored to be connected to royalty and who doesn't really want to marry either. And they decide to make a convenient arrangement. And all of you romance fans will know what to expect next, which is that their feelings start to get the better of them. Their feelings start to surprise them. That maybe this convenient arrangement might actually work. That there might actually be love there. I'm a sucker for that kind of plot anyway. We'll see. I'm not sure how well it transmits to the present day, but I'm willing to give it a try. Okay, this next one is also on the silly side, but oh, so enjoyable. This is by Nasri Noor, who is an author who has been very prolific in self-publishing on Amazon and elsewhere. I've never talked to this guy, but I get the strong impression that he has got the self-publishing mechanics down pat. Good editor. Very good cover art. Make sure that you have cover art, and if you're doing books in series, make sure the covers are all consistent so that you can look at it and see that these are books in series. And also, pump things out. Have a good editor and good beta readers, but pump things out. I'd be interested to know what kind of living Nasri Noor makes off Amazon. I read a book of his years ago in the Arcane Hearts series and loved it. Just loved it. It's not Tolstoy, but it isn't meant to be. It was really, really enjoyable, and the Arcane Heart series went on forever and ever, and I loyally got each one of those books and enjoyed the heck out of every one of them. And this new book is the second book in a new series. This is Vampire Vigilante Book 2. This one's called Thirst Trap. It stars the vampire main character of this book and the predecessor is he's a vampire with an attitude. There's a tagline to the whole series that's really good, but I can't say it on this channel. This is again sexually charged stuff, but lots and lots of fun. He gets transplanted from the louche underbelly, the demimonde of the hyper-sophisticated big city where he is most comfortable. He gets transplanted. Circumstances always find him going elsewhere, and often having to help solve crimes of some kind or other. And it's a stew of very familiar elements, but Nasri Noor, I don't know this author, but he is clearly having fun writing these books, and it comes through. It really comes through. So you enjoy the series. And this one, Thirst Trap, is only book 2. So if that sounds intriguing to you, you could go and get book 1 and catch yourself up right away. Or you could go to any of this author's other series, including Arcane Hearts, which I can certainly vouch for. The whole of that series works. And then I think this next one is the last one. Yes, it is. This is by Michael Dine, and it's This Way to the Universe, a theoretical physicist's journey to the edge of reality. And this is a theoretical physicist looking at not just what the parameters are of the physical universe that we could expect if the models of the so-called Big Bang are real, but where the edges are and what the future is. And I love this kind of book. Absolutely do. It's not always that an astrophysicist can actually render this in terms that are intelligent without condescension, because most readers are not going to know the subject anywhere near as well as Michael Dine does, and he has to know that. So is he going to write about it as though he's talking to a classroom full of children? Sometimes that mars books like this. But I'm hoping it doesn't mar this one. We shall see. I'm always willing to give it a try. I don't need to be condescended to on this or any other subject, but I do need a helping hand. I don't know the physics involved in a lot of this. Although maybe I know more than a general reader, since I've read a large amount of it. Of books like this, so maybe I'm not starting right at the beginning, but I'm always interested to see what insights an author has to say about things like this. So there you go. So there you go. That is the last one. So that is our Friday reads for this date. And when I post this, I'll try to remember to leave links to all the Friday reads that I've watched and liked, although by now there are probably a dozen more of them. I'm going to call it Friday reads. It doesn't matter to me what you call it as long as you make videos like this. I love these check-in videos, because the rest of the time we're all doing other stuff and even other BookTube stuff. We're doing tags, or we're saying how much we dislike criminality, all the other things that booktubers do. It's only this particular ritual where we all just say, here's what's going on. And I love that. So feel free to do one. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. This has gone on quite long enough, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.